So David, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you. I've been waiting for this talk for a while. That's why I wanted to introduce Bob. Gotta press the got it here just a second. And asked Bob for a CV, and he sent me all of 3 lines. He's a very modest man. Retired 2009 after 30 years with Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources as Chief Technician and GIS Analyst, primarily working in forest pest management, forest health, and research. And he lives in Wellington and remains an active volunteer and a keen naturalist. I know that some of his volunteer work included the Shubenacadie Watershed Environmental Protection Society, and he was the trails past chair. And I've been looking at their trails. You know, we should be going out and looking at some of those trails. I'm really not familiar with them. He's also served, I think, with his spouse on the Nova Scotia Nature Trust as a property guardian. And I know that he did some neat work for the Nature Trust on the 100 Islands back around 2012 or so. And I kind of vaguely remember Bob through the fog when I first came to Dell. And I think, Bob, correct me if you're right. Didn't you work with Pete Ogden?
Yes, he was my faculty advisor. Great man. Lost him way too soon.
Yeah, that's right. And I thought I remember that correctly. And then I think the next time I met him was at Peggy's Cove around 2005 when you were looking at pests on jackpine. I just remember meeting you there. And we've since then shared interest in yellow birch and pits and mounds, just some joint interests. And I first learned about Bob's interest in mistletoe on a Nature Trust walk at Purcell's Cove Conservation Land. So remember, that's when you were using a cane a lot because you'd had a big problem with Lyme, I think. And ever since I heard him talk so enthusiastically about mistletoe, I really wanted to hear a talk about it. And we all know that it's been a tradition at the Wildflower Society. We do an early spring walk in Digby County to look at what we thought was the earliest flowering plant in Nova Scotia, which is Charlie skunk cabbage. And a couple of years ago, I made a post about that, the earliest flowering plant in Nova Scotia. And I got a message from one Bob Guscott, and he said, well, hang on, Dave, I'm not so sure about that. I think it could be mistletoe. Anyway, I think this year, I think there's a winner this year that Bob might tell us about, but we should keep in mind every year is a little variable. So anyway, really thank you, Bob, for agreeing to do this talk. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Dave. And thank you, Nova Scotia Wildflower Society, for inviting me to talk about Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe. I think I'll just start into the PowerPoint presentation. I've been interested in Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe for over 30 years, and having worked with DNR for about 30 years, and I was very fortunate to have a job that took me around Nova Scotia, doing surveys from the ground and from the air. And I kind of stumbled on mistletoe because I was conducting aerial surveys for spruce bark beetle in spruce stands, and mostly in northern Nova Scotia, and discovered that what I thought was dead trees or mortality from spruce beetle was actually being caused by this parasitic plant. So that kind of launched me into the whole realm of mistletoe, and it you'll probably be able to tell by the way that I'm talking that it becomes very easy to get obsessive over this tiny little plant. So I'll just go through some of the basic information on mistletoe. The scientific name is Arceuthobium pusillum. It's a parasitic flowering plant, and its host, or what it attacks, is primarily black spruce and white spruce in Nova Scotia. Sometimes you'll find it on red spruce, and very rarely on tamarack larch. Most of the mistletoe family are tropical. I think there's 25, 30 species in the tropics. In Canada, we have 5 species. Most of them are on the West Coast. And in Nova Scotia, there's only one mistletoe, and that's the Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe. It's a little bit on the life history. It's seed-bearing parasitic plant. It's basically less than 3 centimeters in size, with small brown shoots, and very seldom do you see any secondary branching on the shoots. And you can see the small images on both sides. One is the female on the left, or female on the right, and the male on the left. They're both separate male and female flowers. It flowers very early, late March. And one of the very interesting aspects of this plant is that its seeds are discharged explosively from the ripe fruits in the fall. And it has a 4-year life cycle from infection to mature fruit. This is a rundown on the taxonomy. Basically, the Viscerae is the fleshy, showy mistletoes, I think they're sometimes called, and the Arceuthobium are the dwarf mistletoes. And Arceuthobium comes from the Latin arcethos, or pithos, which is juniper, and bios, which is life. Pusillum means very small or tiny. And this is really apt, I think, because the visible structure of the plant is very tiny, less than 5 millimeters. What is not tiny is the colossal landscape level effect that this parasite can have on black and white spruce forests. And you can see on the right some of the, you can see the brooms and the damage, and that's a white spruce, oldfield white spruce in Antigonish County. On the left, you've got the female shooting shoots. This is the distribution, and on the left in North America, goes as far out as Manitoba, and down through the Lake States, where it's a serious problem in black spruce, and down into southern New England. And on the right is the Canadian Forestry Service distribution map, showing the distribution in Atlantic Canada and Quebec. You can see Nova Scotia has pretty much, you can find it from one end to the other. Newfoundland, it's restricted to the west coast and a little bit on the north coast. And I suspect because it's probably more widespread, but just hasn't been surveyed, or hasn't been, no one's been there to look for it on the south coast. This is interesting. This is an iNaturalist map, and there's, as of the on the 23rd of March, there was 39 observations for dwarf mistletoe in Nova Scotia, which is really interesting to me because and I'll show you later, I'm working on a distribution map. So this, as I heard you talking about iNaturalist earlier, Bob, and what an amazing system and venue for citizen science. I'm just so excited about it. And what's interesting here is that this was on the 23rd of March, and I went back today, and it went from 39 to 43. So there's four more observations of mistletoe in the last few days. So this is really interesting to me. So yeah, I think that I'll start using this more and more to map the distribution that I'm seeing. Now I'm just going to go back to the kind of the history of mistletoe in or pusillum, or EDM, I call it, Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe. Henry David Thoreau described broom-like masses on spruce at Walden Pond in his journal, and he did this in 1858. And this was 13 years before Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe had been described, which is fascinating. I wish this is a picture that I took at at Walden Pond in the 90s and or late 80s, early 90s, and I wasn't quite into mistletoe like I am now, and I certainly would have been searching for mistletoe on spruce there if I had known this. The other interesting thing that on the top is Lucy Millington, and she was an amateur botanist, and she was the first one to collect Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe in Williamsburg in upstate New York in 1871. She was quite excited when she found the brooms and the shoots, and she sent some samples off to a botanist, Charles Horton Peck, who was a New York State botanist, who was the first to describe it, and he published his description in the Annals, the Transactions of the Albany Institute in 1872. So that was the start of the official recognition of Arceuthobium pusillum in the world. So now I'll go into what you see when you're out in the forest. Is the first thing you'll see is the witches' brooms, which are these large masses of twigs and branches on spruce. And it looks pretty busy there with all that witches' brooms going on, but each one of those brooms are individual, either male or female, Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe plants, and they take over the system of nutrients and water with the tree, and it tells the tree to bring those nutrients to the brooms, and eventually the tree declines and oftentimes dies from being overwhelmed by the number of witches' brooms. And often you'll see the crown will die first, and you'll see the brooms. I've got lots of illustration pictures, so you'll see more of them as we go along. Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe is found in the branches of mostly spruce. In Nova Scotia, it's black spruce and white spruce, pretty much. And as I said, it derives its nutrients from the host plant. The witch's broom is a direct translation from the German Hexenbesen, I think that's how you say, which is literally witch's broom. And these brooms are the most host spruce trees' reaction to the pathogen. But in our forests and across Canada, I guess, and the US, you can see witches' brooms that are caused by other agents, like rust. There's a rust fungi that will make the tree create these blooms. You can also, mites can do it, insects, bacterium. Sometimes there's no cause or no discernible cause. But as I said earlier, you can see on these two, I believe they're white spruce. This is on the Cole Harbor, the Marshlands Trail, and going out to Lawrencetown, excuse me, where all the needles have pretty much disappeared because all the nutrients are going to those brooms. And in this case, I suspect that, it was partly a drought thing as well. The trees were overwhelmed and they died. So here are some examples of other agents that can cause witches' brooms. On the left, you've got the fir broom rust, which has an alternate host on chickweed, and it's a concern in Nova Scotia because the Christmas tree growers are concerned about this, and they don't like to see it because it can disfigure Christmas trees. If it's in a high, usually you don't see very many brooms. You might see one or two. And on the right, you've got spruce broom rust, which is another agent that can make the tree create these brooms. For both of them, so the rule of thumb in Nova Scotia, if you see a single broom or a few brooms on a single tree, then it's not likely mistletoe. If it's on a balsam fir, then it's likely fir broom rust, because you will not find Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe on balsam fir. And if you want to be sure of it, if you look closely at the broom, the rust fungi have spore-producing blisters, and you can see that on the right where the spores are produced and released, both on the left and the right. So both of them are rust fungi. Now in Nova Scotia, as I said earlier, it's primarily black and white spruce. And usually, like if I'm driving on the highway or on a road or walking and I see a broom, my eyes go to it. And if it's just like I said, a single or a couple, then I don't, I kind of rule out mistletoe, because if mistletoe is there, it's in the landscape. It's on there's many brooms on many trees, and inevitably, if you see one and you're not sure if it's a real mistletoe outbreak, there'll be lots of it, and it can be acres, hundreds of acres in size in terms of the actual outbreak. The other sign that you can look for is these thickened branches where the broom is attached to the branch. And I imagine it has something to do with the nutrients from the tree going all the way to the broom, and also going to the branches that are actually supporting the broom. So they quite often get quite thick. And once your eye is trained to look for it, you can see it quite easily. On the right, there's it's a little bit hard to pick out, but it's a black spruce that the branch comes out and it does a complete 180 degrees around and then goes straight up. And then the other one on the right hand is going straight up. So it's quite astonishing. And even a dead tree on the ground with this thick branch with the broom on the end, that's, an old black spruce that it's died, and you know that it was mistletoe because you've got the thickened branch and the broom. Now, this is a little bit close up on the brooms and the shoots. They're dioecious or distinctly male and female, and that goes for the shoots that you see, excuse me, and also for the brooms. So when you look closely at a broom, it's either a male from a male plant or a female. And the female, if you zoom in on the actual structure itself, it's very small. It's got this kind of brownish green color, and you don't see it on the bottom picture, but the female flowers are tiny little things that you can't hardly see, and they're the ones that actually mature into the seeds. So through the winter and early spring, before the flowers open up, the staminate shoots look like this. They got these little folded, rounded heads. And the female flowers, the male staminate flowers look like this. And right now, they're in bloom. At least they've been in bloom here in Wellington since the 15th of March. Last year, they were in bloom here on the 30th of March. So it was 2 full weeks earlier this year compared to last, which was surprising. Now, there's, as Dave was saying earlier, there's a little bit of controversy, I guess, or interest in what is the earliest flowering plant in Nova Scotia. And there's happened there. Yeah. Okay. So the plan was after I went down to the Digby Neck on the lovely Balancing Rock Trail, because I knew that there was skunk cabbage there. And I just happened to be there a few years ago, and I noticed that there was mistletoe. And I thought, man, if you wanted to get a place that you could find out what's the earliest bloomer, this would be the place to go. So I went down last year on the 30th. It was the 30th of March, and they were both in bloom. So this year, I had hoped to get down there a week or two earlier and see if we could catch them both in bloom. And I had talked to Charlie, I guess we were going to try to go last week, and week before. I don't know if you did get to go on Saturday, Charlie, did you?
Yes, we did yesterday.
Okay, and did you see any mistletoe
bloom.
blooms?
Yes,
So they were both in bloom?
yes.
Okay, very
Cabbage will
interesting.
bloom earlier in Glenwood Park down
In Yarmouth County.
Yarmouth County. And I
Okay.
haven't looked for the mistletoe in that area.
Okay, well, that's very interesting.
Next year.
Yeah, well, in the run up to this, I noticed that Jeff White had taken a picture of skunk cabbage on.
Yes.
And he said it was Digby Neck, and
Yeah.
that was like a week or 10 days ago. And so I sent a message to him asking him if he had seen it earlier, and he sent this picture back to me last week, and he took it on February 25th. On the Digby Neck. I don't know if it was at Balancing Rock Trail, but to me, I think
that was at Van Tassel Lake, I believe.
Oh, was it? Okay, which is that in Yarmouth or is that in?
It's
Digby.
near Digby.
Okay, but just look at that. The force of that plant forcing itself through the ice in the snow to bloom. I mean, that's astonishing. I really don't think that mistletoe is going to be earlier than February 25th. So I think that skunk cabbage wins the competition for at least the extreme southwest end of Nova Scotia. Maybe for the rest of the province, we could say that, mistletoe reigns. But anyway, I would like to go down maybe even late February, early March next year and see if we can see both.
Yeah, Jeff White has texted that the photo was taken on the neck at East Ferry between Tidville and East Ferry.
Okay, excellent. Now there's something about the skunk cabbage that is able to generate that heat, thermogenesis, I think it's called, where it can create heat to allow it to break through the ice and snow and produce its flowers. It's an amazing plant.
The biochemistry is fascinating.
I bet.
It really is, and you can get it on the internet. All you have to do is Google on biochemistry of skunk cabbage. Most of the work has been done in Japan.
Very
the enzyme systems have been worked out.
Yeah.
It's
Well, even
fantastic.
just the distribution in Nova Scotia is so fascinating, that it obviously came across the land bridge and got as far as where it is now, and slowly, I suppose, over hundreds of years, it'll move further east. Anyway, it was kind of fun to be looking for the two earliest plants in the same location. I'll continue.
I see in the chat, Ronald Arsenault says Irvin Olson has found Mayflowers in bloom in January of the last 3 or 4 years. It's in the chat.
Wow.
January.
That's astonishing. It's all, and when you see it, I mean, for many years I wasn't familiar with it being here, but it looks like something out of another age. It's really so strange looking. So I'll continue. This is in the fall now. The female shoots mature into these sort of oblong greenish seed pods, and they're 3 times 1.5 millimeters, like little tiny footballs actually. I'll see. So I had the slide. Yes, I had the slide mixed up. It should have been before. So yeah, this is the story about the earliest flowering plant and the visit to Digby Neck last year. And anyway, I apologize. So that's the seed pod, and I'll go to. So this was when I first got excited about mistletoe. I wanted to find out when the seed pods were discharged. So I set up a little research plot in Brookfield and used just cheesecloth, and I draped it over the brooms. They were close to the ground, and then checked them every week through the fall. So I soon discovered that most of the seeds were being discharged in early to mid-October for that year in '93. What's really quite fascinating, this mode of dispersal that Eastern Dwarf, all the dwarf mistletoes have this exploding seed technology, I guess. And the fruit literally explodes like a cannon, and it shoots the seed at a velocity of almost 100 kilometers an hour. And it can go up to 10 meters or 30 feet. And it's been measured to a maximum of 16 meters. Now, there's lots of factors there, depending on how high the broom is on the tree and the trajectory down. And the right seeds seem to respond to temperature changes and are covered in a sticky substance called viscin. And I have to, when I was, before I set up the plot that year in '93, and I was just dabbling a little bit in mistletoe, one day I collected, this would have been in the fall, I collected a sample and I put it in a large brown paper bag. And I came back to the car and I was driving back home and I had the heat on, it was cool. And all of a sudden, it sounded like popcorn exploding on the seat beside me. I could not believe it. It was like pop, 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 pop. And here were the seeds, because the temperature from the car, I assume, was activating the mechanism. So they were popping away, and it literally sounded like popcorn. I'd love to duplicate that, but it was one of those moments where I was completely smitten with mistletoe. Like I wanted to learn and know everything I could know about this creature that, I'd been seeing and knew about and wondered about, but it blew my mind. So when these seeds are discharged, they have this viscid coating, and if they land on a spruce needle, either black or white or sometimes red spruce, they'll slide down the needle till they get to the base of the needle, and the viscin will almost cement to the stem, and it will be able to penetrate into the stem and start its life cycle. What's interesting is that in some research that was done in the US, in Minnesota, they looked at, they were seeing these sort of circular impacts in forests. They were calling them mistletoe vectors, I think. So they assumed that the mistletoe was being moved there by either animals or birds. So they set up a whole capture setup that they could catch birds, and they examined them for seeds. And sure enough, they were finding that many types of birds were landing in spruce trees when the seeds were ripe, and the seeds were landing on them, and then the bird would fly to another spruce tree, and the seed would fall off or get stuck to a needle. So that was causing these I call them mistletoe holes, and I'm going to talk about them in the Nova Scotia situation in a minute. But when the seed lands on the stem, then it actually penetrates into the tissue. It's got a endophytic tissue that it produces that enters into the spruce, and you can see those lines coming down are called sinkers, and they actually penetrate into the phloem and the wood and the xylem, and they start being able to take nutrients and water from the host plant or the host tree. And on the right, you can see it's usually a 4-year. This is a stylized one for dwarf mistletoes, but it's similar to Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe in that it takes 4 years once the seed lands on a twig and penetrates. It takes 4 years till it produces its aerial shoots. And after the flowering for the males in the spring and the seed discharge for the females in the fall, the shoots fall off. But you can still recognize if they've had mistletoe, because they leave behind these little tiny basal cups, those cup-like shapes that you see. So if you're not sure and you want to take one of those stems and look at it under magnification, then you'll be able to see the cups to verify. But to me, I've never really had to do that because there's always enough brooms and other information to verify. So in the literature, the Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe outbreaks are found in close proximity to water, whether it's a bog, a swamp, a lake, a river, ocean. It's usually absent from drier upland sites. In Quebec, the literature said that Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe is restricted to within 2 kilometers of lakes and rivers. And in Maine, it occurs on white spruce only within 400 meters of the coast. There seems to be a requirement for high humidity in the spring for successful growth. In Nova Scotia, and this, as I talked earlier about a distribution map, this is a map that I've been working on for almost 25 years. And still, it's a work in progress. You can see, and I kind of, on the North Shore, Cape Breton, Inverness County side, it's pretty much all white spruce and primarily old field white spruce. So these are old pastures that have grown up in white spruce after the farms and pastures were abandoned in the 20s, 30s, 40s. The Pictou, Antigonish, and Inverness counties in the white spruce, you can see it's mostly coastal and it's mostly in these abandoned fields that have come back in white spruce. Now on the south, the Eastern Shore and the South Shore and the North Mountain, it's black spruce, primarily black spruce. So there's almost like two different populations, although it's just really the hosts that are different. As I said earlier, when I was conducting surveys for spruce bark beetles in the 90s, I was categorizing all these dead trees as being caused by spruce bark beetle. But when I actually went out and looked at it from the ground, I realized that all of the stands of dead trees on the coast were dying from mistletoe and not from spruce beetle, although sometimes they got mixed in together. And you can see to the left on the aerial photograph is Livingston Cove, and you can see the mortality all the way along. It's like waves, as you can see there. And this is another look at the same area, but from the ocean side, and you can see some of that kind of the pattern to the mortality in the dead spruces, and you can see different age spruces behind that. So those are old pastures that are growing back. In 2007, I worked with the Bowater Mersey at the time. They were a little concerned about the amount of mistletoe occurring in south of Lake Rosignol. So the first year I did a small little test area with the helicopter, flying tracks and using a GPS mapping the occurrence of mistletoe, and then expanded that the next year into 2007. And you can see that the mistletoe, the abundance of mistletoe in all of that area. And going back to, the research shows that mistletoe occurs very close to water, whether it's lakes or rivers or streams. And the map doesn't really show you the swamp areas because most of that is kind of swampy. And you can see in some of this, that's not a really clear picture, but most of the spruce are small, and you can see some of the mortality. And the bigger trees are white pine that aren't affected by the mistletoe, and they're doing fine. This is a little bit better shot because you could actually look down and you can see the logging road, and to the right of it, you've got all the black spruce. You can see the brooms, and you can see the dead trees, and you can also see the white pines that are. I mean, another 40, 50 years, the white pines will dominate that site, and the black spruce will just cycle through. The young seedlings coming up will get the mistletoe, and then they'll die. So it's very unproductive land, and Bowater was a little bit concerned about it. And then, through the years, since I retired from natural resources, I have this itch to always map and survey for mistletoe. So my wife has learned that wherever we go, the GPS comes out, and she's actually learned that because I'm usually driving, she's actually learned to click the waypoints on the GPS because she can recognize the brooms now. So, she's been a good sport on that. But she's very highly suspicious whenever we're going on a trip. Is this a mistletoe trip, or is this a fun trip? So wherever I go, this was a couple of years ago. We drove down the North Mountain from sort of east to west, and you can see again, close to the water, close to the coast, the mistletoe is everywhere. And the gap that you see at the end of North Mountain there going towards Digby Gut, there's no road there, so I assume it continues that same pattern all the way down there. And this is the kind of thing that you'll see as you're driving along the road. Often there's dead trees. And depending on the year, if there's a lot of drought, then there'd be a lot more mortality, because I think the mistletoe keeps the spruce tree on the edge of life and death. And sometimes, it's pushed the tree to the point that it can't survive, especially when something else like an insect or a drought comes along. Now, another way that I figured out how to map mistletoe is by using Street View in Google Maps or Google Earth. Just going down on the street, and you can see when you look. Wish I could zoom in on that. I probably can, but anyway, it's to me that I'm looking at a dead spruce tree with many brooms on it, and there's another tree with a bunch of brooms on it. To me, that's mistletoe, and I would use that to map a location. And I've got a little map on the left that will locate it on a bigger map for me. As Dave said, I worked for one summer with the Nature Trust on the Eastern Shore. We went out to the 100 wild islands. I think we went to 11 islands that summer, looking at the islands in terms of protecting them and making a big project of protection for them, conservation. So wherever I went on most of the islands, and those are just the tracks that I happened to walk through the islands, and I would mark the locations of mistletoe as I went. So I think that it's not a rarity for birds to carry the seeds to offshore islands. I think it happens a lot, and there's the proof there. There's no, unless someone's carrying seeds out to those islands, there's no way to explain that except by birds. What I would like to know in the lake states, it's the gray jays that are the primary carriers of seeds. That I would be curious to know what kind of birds are carrying these seeds, because this would be late September, early October, birds going from the mainland to the islands or from island to island. It would be interesting to see what species are doing that. I suspect blue jays, bigger birds, but I think warblers can carry them as well. And this is what it looks like on the eastern shore on those islands. In fact, there's so much mortality that it's tough walking. You've got to really burst your way through this thick growth. Look for deer trails when you can. Um, this is a spread and intensification. Research shows that black spruce trees are killed often within less than 15 years. The rate of spread of infected trees varies from 2.5 feet to a year measured on the ground to almost 5 feet a year as measured by the enlargement of mortality centers, as the guys doing the research in Ontario call them, or I call them mistletoe holes. And I've got some pictures that illustrate that. Birds, jays, squirrels can transmit the seeds great distances. And many coastal islands have it. I apologize for the angle on the shot. This is one I took from the helicopter doing a survey, but you can see this is Margery Island or Seawolf Island off of Dunvegan, Chimney Corner in Inverness County. And at one time, the whole island was cleared for sheep, and it all grew back in white spruce. And these are mortality or mistletoe holes, which, conceivably started with one seed from one or two seeds, actually, because you have to have a male and female, brought over and starting with 1 or 2 trees and then slowly expanding out by 2, 3, 4 feet each year. So after 20, 25 years, you've got these large circular features in the landscape, which, I've been looking at and seeing these for years, but not really kind of twigging in that it was being caused by it wasn't a site thing. It was organic. It was another creature, a plant actually causing this mortality, so you see these features when you start looking on the landscape. This is in Antigonish County, I believe, and this is a crescent. You can see like the rounded shape to the mortality, and that's dead spruce trees dying slowly and expanding out as the mortality moves into the stand and expands by 3 or 4 feet a year. Down in the front, I think you've got some mistletoe, but also some spruce bark beetle damage at the same time. This is what it looked like as it moves into the stand. And as well, it's hard to say that it's not mistletoe. It's only one thing can cause that kind of damage. Again, this is coastal mortality and white spruce. And this kind of illustrates it's a little bit hard to see, but on the left-hand picture, you can see, like, if you look for the pattern of the dead trees, how it's expanded out. And on the right and front, you can see that it's moving into the stand in the spruce, but it's leaving behind probably birch and pin cherry and other trees that are growing in behind as the trees die. And these are some I call them mistletoe holes that you can see from the aerial photograph, but also from the image. This is in Mabu coal mine, and if you look closely, you can see the round shape, the dark or lighter green, which is the hardwoods in the hole, and then the mortality of the dead spruce around the edge, and then you can see it eating into the old field black spruce. And this is an oblique shot. That same thing if you look on the insert. So these, once you start seeing them, they're everywhere. And not only, often you don't see the full hole, you'll see a crescent shape because it's not big enough, or it's right on the shore. You don't see that full rounded structure. You see the crescent structure. And this is two, maybe 3, but 2 for sure. You've got mistletoe holes. This is in McKinnon's Brook, where those lovely hiking trails are. And you can see how the trees have died and left the hardwoods in a circular manner. Now, one of my hopes and dreams is to just go in and do some transects across those mortality, across the holes, just to see what species are coming in, and would hope that it would be maybe closer to what the natural forest looked like there, because all this area in coastal Inverness was cleared by those crazy Scotsmen in the 1800s. And when they abandoned them to go off to greener pastures in Alberta, it all came back in white spruce. So it's a really interesting kind of story that, you know, talks about our agricultural history in Nova Scotia and how white spruce comes back in pastures. And mistletoe, you know, has found this niche of getting established in these old field white spruce stands and moving through them. This is a really interesting one. There's 3 mistletoe holes in the trail. It's the Butterall Trail at Cape Breton Highlands National Park, just as you're coming into the gate and Shetty Camp. The next picture shows, this is an aerial photograph from 1939. And you can see the road and some of the farms. And you can see how in the back area that it was abandoned. The front area below the farms is still cleared, still pasture, but they've abandoned the hill part, and that's already coming back in white spruce. I'll go back to that aerial shot. So those white spruce grew up, probably got to be 50, 60 years old, and then the mistletoe got in and slowly radiated out in 3 different centers, killing trees as they went and leaving behind the hardwoods. This is Port Hood Island and just off of Port Hood on the western end. You can see that most of the island was cleared and pastured in the 1800s and came back in white spruce, and you've got terrific mortality in the white spruce there, and you can see the dead trees, even the brooms from this far away. So the impact on host trees includes growth loss, mortality, of course, the reduced seed crop, wood quality effects, predisposition to insects and fungi, or that weakens the tree. It's not vigorous, can't fight off other pests, and also the ecological effects. In Newfoundland, Singe did a study in, I think it was 89, and you can see the distribution is not extensive there, but he went through and did a lot of the baseline research to come up with incredible numbers in terms of the impact that these outbreaks were having in the black spruce, which is a lot more important in Newfoundland than Nova Scotia, at least in terms of forest industry. He was getting mortality up to 38%, and 11% reduction in tree height and 9% reduction in diameter. In Megacy with the Canadian Forestry Service did in 1983, he did a sample of 123 locations in Nova Scotia and found that 20% of these stands were being impacted by black spruce. This is a picture just from the other day. I found one of these heavily impacted sites just not even 3 kilometers from where I sit right now. It's a brand new area for me. And Megacy found on average for all species, there was a 47% reduction in total volume. So in other parts of the world, there's some really interesting research being done on mistletoes, and it's considered in some areas to be a keystone species. And a new word that I wasn't familiar with, a keystone resource, in that, you know, this tiny little parasitic plant has a huge impact on the overall ecosystem. And at least in Australia and Africa, it's very important. A lot of wildlife, different birds use the mistletoe for food and spread it around. But I really think that in Nova Scotia, the mistletoe can dominate a forest ecosystem, especially these black spruce and white spruce forests, and through mortality, and they can influence the forest succession. For instance, down in Rossignol, where the all the spruce are dropping out, the balsam fir are fine, they'll come up, and the white pine are the ones that seem to be doing the best. This is a picture that I took on Borgles Island, and what really intrigued me is that as the black spruce dies, the huckleberry, because the black spruce will die over many years, so the light will increase gradually over 5, 10, 15 years, and in that time, the huckleberry will just spread underneath. So what you have is a black spruce stand turning into a huckleberry barren. It'd be wonderful to get out there and do some plots to calibrate this. And this is an area close to where I am now in Fall River, where it's mostly black spruce, but that large tree right in the center, that's a red spruce. And it's almost growing above the mistletoe. It's a vigorous grower. It's a good site. But what's really interesting about this picture is that pretty much every spruce tree in the picture has mistletoe. And those dead trees that you see on the ground, those are all have died from mistletoe impact. You can see the brooms, the dead brooms on those trees. So 30, 40 years ago, that was a spruce stand, and the mistletoe has moved through it, killed all those spruce trees, and the kalmia on the ground, as you know, is quite, it's very hard for any other plants to grow through the kalmia. So it's actually changing the structure of that forest stand, which, you know, it's pretty amazing. Now in Nova Scotia and elsewhere, forest fire is one of the few ways that Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe can be eliminated from the landscape. This is a picture that I took of the Porter's Lake fire. And it's interesting because I had been in that area where that's burning the year before looking for brown spruce longhorn beetle. And it was full of mistletoe. And when I talked to some of the firefighters because I worked on this fire, they were talking about how they would, the fire would go along slowly and then all of a sudden it would explode. And they figured that a lot of the dead brooms from the mistletoe were causing the accelerant to explode. And at some places you could see the flames even from, you know, this is probably 2,000 feet up. So that's another factor that's kind of had an impact in the distribution of mistletoe, because starting in the 1920s and 30s, in fact, the reason why the Department of Lands and Forests came into being was primarily to fight forest fires. So we've been putting out forest fires for, you know, almost 100 years now. So this has allowed the mistletoe to come back into the landscape, and it's not likely to change a whole lot with our firefighting programs that we have now. And to the right, there's just a map of that was quite a large fire, almost 2,000 hectares. There probably won't be a lot of mistletoe in that impact zone for, you know, maybe 100 years. So I'm getting to the end here. The mistletoe, when you start reading about it, there's a lot of legends and mythology about mistletoe, especially the white mistletoe that grows in Europe. It's called Viscum album. And my daughter lives in Slovakia, so these pictures are from Slovakia. And you can see how it's everywhere in the landscape. And some of the trees are completely overtaken with mistletoe. Some of the mythology is quite fascinating. I won't get into it here, but you know, the Druids worshipped the mistletoe. They thought it wasn't of the ground and it wasn't of the air, it was in between. So they would actually have ceremonies on moonlit nights where they would one priest would climb up into the tree with a golden knife and he would cut the mistletoe, and then other priests, Druid priests, would have a blanket so that the mistletoe would not touch the ground, and they would collect these and use them in ceremonies. And that led to the whole idea that mistletoe can be used to protect your house at the front of the house. And then I think that eventually evolved into, you know, putting it in your entrance so that anyone coming in you'd have to be kissed, right? So my wife wasn't really keen on having the shot with the mistletoe, but had to have one. So yeah, the Christmas tradition to hang mistletoe over the doorway, and this tradition is based on the true or the leafy mistletoes rather than the dwarf mistletoes. The Larson cartoon kind of says it all. I did come across just recently a report that Finald, who reported that in northern Maine, French and English women would wear sprigs of spruce with mistletoe in their hair for the midwinter ball. And that's the only real mythology aspect that I was able to find for our Eastern Dwarf Mistletoe, but I would love to have some more information on that and wonder what they look like. Did they make a garland out of the sprigs of mistletoe? And finally, so much of the information that I've been able to use over the years has come from Frank Hawksworth. He's called the godfather of dwarf mistletoe. He's been dead almost 30 years now, but his impact and influence lives on with the whole cohort of mistletoe researchers, mostly in Western US and Canada. But I certainly have learned a lot from him, and I have to honor him for his work. So yeah, there we go. Questions?
Wow, what a wonderful talk.
Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful.
Thank
I'll
you.
ask a question, Bob.
Sure.
I'm curious about the white spruce, black spruce. So all the white spruce we saw on the South Shore, and it was killed bark beetle. None of that was mistletoe.
I don't think, unless it was. I mean, sometimes you can have both in the same site. I have seen it on the islands in St. Margaret's Bay.
Okay, I have seen it there. Yeah.
I've been paddling my kayak out there the odd time, and it's heavily there because most of those islands
on white spruce. Are you saying on white spruce there?
On white spruce, that's right. Because many of those islands were cleared and they had sheep and cattle, and most of them they abandoned that and they've grown up in white spruce, and the mistletoe found them. The birds have found the spruce, and then the mistletoe came with the birds.
Yeah. No, just because you had your diet on your map, you had the way I understood it. It was mostly white spruce up in Cape Breton, but black spruce along the South Shore.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's actually
it's a mixture.
It's a mixture there.
But the predominant on the North Shore is white spruce. Predominant on the South Shore and Eastern Shore is black, except where you've got old field, and that doesn't happen very often. As you
the old field stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So would you say is it as important as the spruce beetle in those areas?
I'm prejudiced. I spent years trying to get foresters interested in it, and it didn't really. I don't know. Black spruce is not considered that valuable. A lot of the foresters, when they see it, they don't see mistletoe. They see site. They see crumble, so they see wind damage, and they say, "Oh, poor site, nothing's going to grow there." And really, in a lot of cases they're probably right, but in a lot of cases they're wrong, because the mistletoe just makes it look like they can't grow trees, but it's just because it's organic. It's an organism. It's actually that's what's controlling it, not the nutrients or the soil. So to me, it's just. And to me, I'm fascinated by the whole thing, and it's, the actual idea that we're using a lot of our black spruce for pulp is it's irrelevant to me. I think it's more, in terms of the forest ecosystem story. I think that's to me the most exciting part of it.
Yeah, incredible. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bob, I've talked to Joe Johnson about this, and he was surprised when I told him that the dwarf mistletoe grew on black spruce. He'd only seen it on white spruce in Ontario.
Interesting. Well, and maybe you have to be in the black spruce country to see it. But it's obvious that the mistletoe has evolved with the spruces, right? Just by its range.
Because I told him I had seen it mostly on black spruce. I've seen some on white spruce, but mostly black spruce.
Yes. Well, I mean, if you're out, like you did see it in bloom the other day, so you know what you're looking for now. It's it's lovely to see that little spark of yellow color at this time of year, because there's really not a lot to look at.
I photographed it before with a film camera years ago.
Okay.
That was down near Conrad's Beach.
Okay. Yeah. On the white, there is some natural white spruce there, eh? That dune forest is. I haven't seen it in that lovely dune forest there, but I'm looking for it all the time.
This is on the trail. There's the old railbed trail goes up through from Conrad's Beach. It goes up through to Dartmouth.
Okay, yeah, I've seen it on that.
Yeah, it was up a little further on that trail. That's where I saw it.
Yeah, no, I know about that outbreak there. I've seen, I've mapped that and seen it.
That was in bloom, but that was in late May, early June.
Okay.
Oh.
Bob, sorry, Bob. John Monder here from Newfoundland. About those amazing exploding seed things. A while back, maybe several years ago, I saw a very slow motion video of this happening. And what was interesting in that video is that when the right capsule separates, it drops maybe several times the length of itself, and then in midair the thing blows out. It's sort of almost like you jump out of an airplane with a parachute and you wait 5 seconds and pull the ripcord. It's delayed. Well,
I wonder in the photograph that I found online, it shows like a stream of liquid, looks clear liquid, almost like a some kind of rocket type ship exhaust. And I wonder if that, like the temperature triggers the release, it drops a little bit, and then it engages whatever mechanism that charges it. But
I think that's what happens. Yeah, there's a little bit of a delay there, so it's sort of in midair, and it does it before it falls far enough to hit anything.
Yeah.
And but I mean, the timing of that is so critical.
That's an evolutionary thing too, to get it, because you would think that you'd want the trajectory to go as far out and as high as possible.
Well, maybe it takes it lower down the tree or something, to a fresh
area. You can imagine in some of these stands that are heavily infested with the mistletoe, at the right time, there'd be tens of thousands of these seeds flying everywhere.
Oh yeah. If I find that video, I'll let you know. I just saw it somewhere, but I can't.
I'd love to see it. I actually haven't searched YouTube, and might very well be on YouTube, but I would love to see that for sure, because it would really excite a lot of people.
Yeah, but the timing and the precision of that process is so amazing. It's just a split second,
Well, I'm just wondering if they go into does it go into a spiral like a football, so it gets better distance, and
I don't know. Anyway, thanks.
I had a question for you, Bob, so if they're blooming so early, how are they being pollinated? Is it insect pollination or is it wind?
I think, the literature says wind and insect. For us, I mean, there's not many insects out right now that I know of. There are some gnats, I think, that are out maybe, but I would think it's mostly wind. I mean, you look at the little tiny flowers, and the pollen is so infinitesimal. Although I did read that there has been pollen found in the pollen record, back thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. I mean, so there is a recognizable pollen fingerprint for it. But I'd be it's so little studied. It's amazing to me that I wish I was 30 years younger because there's so many questions and so little answers.
Well, another one that you may not have an answer for is like, I'm curious that, like you were saying that a broom is basically one plant. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the question is, when the seeds explode, with, you think a lot of them would get stuck in the broom itself. And
Yes.
so I guess there would be there's some kind of mechanism that they wouldn't, that would prevent them from sprouting when there's already the plant there.
That's
Although then the
it.
question would be that but on the other hand, when the seeds are being shot out, that's near the death of the parent plant, isn't it?
That's true. Yes, it's the 4th year, and they drop off. But there is some evidence that the brooms can become systemic in the tree, so that they go down the branch and maybe pop out somewhere else as another broom.
Oh,
I'm not absolutely sure on that, but it's a very interesting question. Many questions, few answers. That's what I love about science and plants and critters.
You want, would you like the coordinates of the tree that I found it on?
I would love to have that. I'll add it to my database.
Okay.
Have you got from a GPS or?
Well, it's Alpine Quest, which is a mapping app that I have.
Yeah.
And it gives you UTM and
Okay,
latitude.
UTM is what I work with all the time. So,
Oh,
but
wow,
it's so
yeah.
easy to translate back and forth now.
It
But
is.
yeah, I'll add that to my expanding database.
I'll send it to you.
Thanks very much, Anne.
John here again. Oddly enough, about a day or two before I realized that you were going to be giving this talk, I was reading a paper on brooms in general from the west coast of North America. That includes the rust brooms and the mistletoe brooms and all kinds of brooms. But the main topic of the paper was talking about the use of brooms for nesting and roosting and resting and stuff for marten and possibly also squirrels. And have you noticed any critters that seem to use these things as shelter or perching places or whatever?
I haven't noticed it myself, but I know that the literature says, especially on the West Coast and in the Lake States, that a lot of different animals use the brooms for shelter. Some of them eat the actual mistletoe seeds. Even I think there was reference to barred owls may use them on the Pacific coast. When I was a kid growing up I was born in Newfoundland, but I was raised in Dartmouth. I lived out in Eastern Passage, and when we went out in the woods to make a campfire, we always looked for the brooms, right? And I don't know if they were witches' brooms from mistletoe or from broom rust, but I know we would, search them out, find them, because if you wanted to get a roaring fire going instantaneously, you would find one of those brooms, put it on the fire, and boom. So, I mean, even as a 10-year-old, I knew about brooms, but I didn't really, kind of one thing that I find fascinating in your life, that you encounter things and you don't understand it, but it comes back to you. So I don't know if that's other people have that experience, but brooms are tremendous for getting fires going, especially the dead ones.
Yeah. So if you're from
dry wood.
What's that?
Right, John?
Okay. Yeah, no, but you're from Newfoundland. Whereabouts?
Well, my dad was in the Navy, so I was born in St. John's.
Oh, very good.
So I'm what do they call a city boy, or no, the
Townie.
townie.
Yeah.
But
anyway, I'm sorry.
But yeah, as a Newfoundland, I suffered my whole life because everywhere I went, as soon as they found out I was from Newfoundland, they'd make fun of me. And it wasn't until I got to be an adult that I got back there and I fell in love with the place. And
yeah,
I can't.
So anyway, what I was going to say is that I haven't got any real answers, but with regard to martin in brooms, I have asked a fellow called Bruce Rodriguez here with the provincial wildlife, and I've asked him, like, have you ever seen this for the Newfoundland pine martin, which is, relatively rare? And so he says, well, I should start looking and see. So I don't know. I'll let you know if he comes up.
Well, no, that's very interesting, because I know there's a lot of effort in Nova Scotia too, up in Cape Breton, to find and protect pine marten habitat. And if this is a factor in this success for pine marten, then it should be something that should be known.
Yeah,
very interesting. Yes. Well, I hope I haven't bored anyone with my my mistletoe obsession.
No.
I could say that there's. I really should be joining the Wild Flora Society, because you guys are into all the things that I'm interested in. So
That's true. I think I can say on behalf of everybody that this was very interesting, not in the least boring. It was a great presentation, Bob.
thank you.
You
So
can
much.
tell because everybody's still here. Nobody signed off. So I guess I think everybody's had a chance to ask their questions now. We're ready to wrap up then. Okay, so again, thank you very much, Bob, for a well done job, and look forward to meeting you in person someday.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, having maybe a little more activity with the Wild Flora group. That would be wonderful. And I guess so. Our next meeting is scheduled to be on the is it April? Yeah, I got to look at my calendar here.
28th, I think.
20. No, I think 25th.
25th, yes.
Yeah. And that'll be our annual general meeting. And as well, I believe our presenter then is Sean Blaney. Is that right, Charles?
That's right. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I always look forward to him. And then, but in the meantime, we may have one or two certainly one, maybe possibly a second field trip, which we, again, just keep track of the website, and we'll try to email you as well when we have.
Hopefully the weather will hold up this time. We've
That's always the
canceled a couple
case,
trips
yeah.
because of weather.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'll have to give it our best. Okay, so anything else?
Nope.
Well, then I guess.
Thank you very much, Bob. That was great.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
That was great, Bob. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Yes, I enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot. Have a good night, everyone.
Okay, good
All
night.
right.
Over.